So we're going to jump back in with Abraham, and we're kind of in the middle of his story. We've already had God uh, give certain blessings and covenants and be speaking to Abraham. We've seen that happen already. We know that he has a blessing to have an expansion in his family, in this land, but we've also seen that there's been some obstacles come up. He's already taken off to Egypt during a famine. The land couldn't support him. So this blessing of this great land is already showing itself difficult to stay in the land. We've also seen that his wife is barren and she isn't having a child. And so again, the blessing's being challenged in that way. Again, so we're going to continue walking through his story. Right now, we're just seeing the horizons of Abraham continue to expand. So first off, God's call to Abraham disassociated him from his family. So that's the first thing he had to do. And then God is going to make him into a nation. So we've seen it move from a family to a nation, and then God's going to bless the whole earth through that nation. So we see this like expanding spheres of Abraham's life that's being described as he's getting these different blessings and trying to walk into something far bigger than what he realizes probably and what had been offered up front. He thought at first he was just leaving, right? He was leaving his family and the land. He was called to go somewhere, and he follows God what seems rather blindly by faith. We don't have the whole story. He does encounter another God-fearing person in Jerusalem eventually, but when he originally gets to the land, we don't really see that. He kind of seems like he's there alone or new to the land. There's obviously people already inhabiting it. And it's up to him to kind of live this out without any support system. And as he and Sarai walk through this whole thing, again, the challenges have been pretty consistent. There's been a famine in the land. There's been separation between him and his remaining family, Lot. And there's also been an international war, right, between those kings that came in. The Babylon and Syrian king came into Sodom and Gomorrah and looted and sacked it and took Lot off, and Abraham had to go solve that. So there's been conflict in this land as well. So his life has not been easy at this point. The promises that God gave him didn't just make everything become easier. There's a lot that goes on in his life and the tests that come up to show his faith, right? And that's kind of the story of Abraham. We see it picked up again in Galatians and Romans by Paul in the New Testament. And he really becomes a shining example of great faith, partly because of the great testing that every one of his promises goes through over and over and over. And he's showing himself faithful through the long haul. And really, I believe he's that picture partly just because of the long-term faithfulness. We sometimes think of faith as a momentary thing where we get saved or we have this belief in God, but really faith is a long-term, long-haul faithfulness to a covenant. That's really what that faith to faithfulness looks like. It means to be in a relationship with God and really stick it out. And we do see that in Abraham. And he doesn't always get everything right the first time, right? Takes off to Egypt, has to be basically sent back by Pharaoh. And so we're going to see how he goes through this process of walking out his calling. And I think we can all kind of relate to that. We have these things in life. It may not be just, God speaking to us or something, but we have goals. We have things that we feel like we're supposed to do. I've had friends that went on to medical school or those kinds of things. And that's a lot of years to invest into something. And there's a lot that comes up through that time, right? And so there's things we all walk through from the day we apply and start something and feel like we're supposed to go in a direction to the time we follow through on it and it comes to fruition. And so sometimes, it could be an educational journey that takes 4 years or 8 years. Like it just really depends on what you're doing. Or you could have other things in your life where maybe it's like Abraham and it's this family thing. It's getting married, having children, all the tests that come up in those processes. So I think we all can relate deeply to what Abraham goes through and this whole struggle. And that's why we're talking about it. That's why we look at these narratives. And again, I love that these people in this narrative, we get the whole story. We don't get some whitewashed version of it. They don't become some legend and hero. He's the great man of faith and nothing ever happened that was difficult, or, he overcame every time perfectly. We get the sense that there's failures involved. There's recoveries. There's repentance, right? After he gets kicked out of Egypt, God's had to intervene because he didn't do what he was supposed to. God doesn't even tell him, oh, you didn't do what you were supposed to. He doesn't become one of those that moves to the east. No, he comes back to God, reaffirms at the altar, and reaffirms his commitment to God at that place. And so we see that Abraham is always coming back to God. And that's really that recovery process of, not not knowing, maybe sometimes taking the wrong step and then recovering after God's corrected us. And again, sometimes the correction comes through the voice of God, right? Adam, Eve, and Cain all get this directive, like God's like, "What did you just do?" And he reads them basically the consequences and tells them what's going on. But Abraham doesn't get that. The consequence is very physical. It doesn't seem to come with the voice of God and narration. He's just kicked out by Pharaoh. And so again, as we're working through this, how is God responding? How is Abraham understanding the situations? He's not confused when he gets kicked out of Egypt. He knows what he should do. He needs to go back and reaffirm his commitment to the promise and the blessing. It was really not a faithful act for him to have left during a hardship. And so again, we don't know what his other options were. That's not really specified. If he had prayed or God would have provided something different or a different plan, we're not sure. So again, we don't want to read too much into any of these narrations, but we also do want to be able to see and think through what Abraham was doing and how he was interacting with God. And that's really what I love about the book of Genesis is there's so many interactions with God and the people that we start to get this idea of how we can relate, how each one of these, great men of faith went about the relationship, right? In Noah's story, we actually see God speaking and we don't see Noah responding other than in action. And that's perfectly fine. And then we see in this Abraham, there's more dialogue between God and Abraham and what that looks like. Abraham sometimes kind of pushes back. There's kind of this, you get the idea of a back and forth. You'll find out later that he's considered a friend of God. We'll actually see this in Moses' life and later in the Pentateuch, this relational aspect of conversing, right? And so there's just different pieces of these relationships. Again, we do see God speaking, especially in Genesis, as the main actor. And we really do see that even in the flood narrative, that God is that main actor. He is going to give direction and all of the instructions, and Noah's going to follow them out kind of as a secondary character in that narrative. But here in Abraham's, we start to get this dialogue a lot more. We start to see how they're going to work together, how God's going to work with Abraham, a faithful man, not just with like Cain, who is ready to move to the east, has really failed and really doesn't have the right heart. But with Abraham, we're seeing that heart, we're seeing that development, and as he goes, because he's engaged in the process. Again, we don't really see that with Cain. Cain was given options to stay in process up until the murder. Sin's crouching at door, he's warned. He didn't really engage ever. We don't really see that. We can't know everything, but we get the sense that he wasn't one of those people that was engaging with God. His family line moves off, and we don't really ever see recovery there. But with Abraham, we're going to constantly see this. So again, just making sure that we get an idea that the promises, let's just go back to kind of the idea of these promises. Abraham is given a promise for a lot of land. He's now in this land, but he's a nomad. So usually when we think of a promise that we get, we immediately internalize this is going to make my life better or easier, or we want God to promise us things that are going to make our lives easier and better. And in a lot of cases, they make our lives harder. I know some people, they asked God to be, or they felt like it was the thing that God wanted them to do, was to be very wealthy so they could be very generous. But they didn't realize, probably when they were younger, that comes at a very great cost and responsibility to manage great wealth. And I know people that have done it really well and have given back into the kingdom, and it's really their ministry. But it's a full-time job managing that. Again, that might have been a promise that God speaks, you're going to be great and wealthy, but it's not going to be for your own benefit, right? And so sometimes we read in here because it's going to make my life easier. And actually, managing great wealth ends up making their life quite more difficult than if they had like just enough to live on, or, that moderate stuff. And so sometimes we don't think that way. We don't think how these things are going to work out when the promises come. The other thing is, God promises him a large family, and all he's seen up to this point is separation. It means leaving his family of origin. It means, losing Lot once they've been walking and living life together for a long time. It means all of this isolation. And that doesn't seem like the promise of family. And so again, sometimes, we're promised things and we think, oh, this is going to fulfill my emotional need for family and people around me and community. And Abraham's given this promise, and then he goes about wandering, not having a place to stay permanently, and not having this community or family around him. And so these are not emotionally fulfilling, or even in a certain sense fulfilling in and of themselves, promises for him personally. And so again, I I kind of put it out there. Have you met somebody who felt like they had a promise from God and they really felt that this would solve their problems? I've had this happen on many occasions. There's people that will come and say, "Oh, this is what God's promised me. This year is a year where this is going to happen in my life." And I think sometimes they have kind of a selfish reason, or they want to emotionally fulfill them. I'm going to feel so much better about my life. And the answer is really probably not. The same internal problems that you currently have are just going to follow you into that next thing. And you see this sometimes as people are maybe getting married or moving into having children. They think that this thing is going to solve their things. And really, it just brings up a lot of things that were probably buried and a lot of the deeper things within in time. Again, those are both really good things, getting married and having children and those kinds of things and building family. But on the other side, they do bring their difficulties, right? You've seen those parents with small children and they're always tired. The kids are up all night. Like, they're a blessing, but at the same time, it's a lot of work. And I say the same thing if God's called you to steward great property or wealth. Like, it's a great blessing, but it's a lot of work. And so again, as we see in Abraham's life, we're going to see this. We're going to see that these promises are actually kind of testing his heart and his motives. Is he going to be more like Lot that sees the lush land and wants to go after it? Or is he going to stay put in the promised land and let God fulfill this his way? So I'm going to start in verse 1 of Genesis 15, and we're going to go through the next couple of chapters of narrative, kind of stop as we need to, but really talk through what this is. And we're going to hit some major covenant verses here. So after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield and great and exceedingly great reward." So here we just see that as all this time with Lot and this international battle goes on, God comes and he's going to reassure Abram. And this is in a vision. It says what format God comes this time, in a vision. So we've already seen Abram talk to God and have God speak to him. And we don't know exactly sometimes the form, but this one's through a vision. And so Abraham's having this vision of God and speaking to him, telling him not to be afraid, which is an important thing, right? He's just gone through an international war. There's a lot of uncertainty. He's helped out, basically the rebels get their stuff back. And God is the one who is initiating here. And again, like I said in Genesis, sometimes, like in Noah's case, Noah seems to be the one initiating. He builds the altar and then God speaks. Here, though, and then at other times, Moses, same thing. Abram at other times, God has spoken and then Abram builds the altar. And so that's kind of what we have here. God is initiating in this case. He's initiating this vision. We just see this as part of the way. So I'm just saying that because I want to draw out a little bit about when God speaks and how he speaks. Sometimes he's initiating it. Sometimes Abram is doing an offering or seeking God, right? That would be us worshiping, coming into those places. It says to seek God. I don't think God intentionally hides himself from us. Sometimes we're having trouble hearing him, but a lot of times we can be seeking him more fully. So again, in this vision, Abram is having a conversation with God, which seems a little difficult or odd, but I mean, again, I think this is rather normal. Within a vision, the person can be responding. It doesn't say if he's speaking out loud or if it's this vision's inside his mind. It doesn't really say. But this is really the first time that it's recorded that Abram is conversing with God. Noah never had a speaking role. He just obeys however God instructs him. He builds an altar and God responds and speaks. Again, we have Adam and Eve having a dialogue, but this is really the first time we've seen Abram have this dialogue. And we'll find that Abram has dialogues with God in several of these chapters. So Abram responds and says, "Lord, God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" Then Abram said, "Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir." So he doesn't have a child. This is a big issue, right? You're supposed to have this large nation. And Abram's faith is being tested. He's literally saying, "God, now that I'm speaking," right? We're in this dialogue. "You promised me some things a couple of chapters ago, and in his life, this was some time, but they're not happening. Like, I get that I need to stay in the land, and we've worked through that, but now we need to work through this child thing." And so again, this seems impossible. The land is being worked out, right? We made it through an international battle. We made it through a famine. But now we're going to really have this test of time over this child and barrenness. And so in verse 4, we go on, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now towards heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. So Eliezer is brought up here, and that is his servant. And that's who he's saying in that previous verses. Look, I don't have an heir. My servant's going to inherit everything. Like, this isn't going to work. And God says, no, this is going to be one of your own. This is going to be from your own body. This is going to be your own child. It's not going to be Lot. It's not going to be Eliezer. It's not going to be somebody else. And by the way, from your line is going to come so many as the stars of the heavens. And part of the reason that we're looking at that is because in Genesis, God has already been laid out as and explained as the creator of the stars, right? And so if God can create all that, he can create that many people from Abraham's line. So we're talking about really reinforcing here, God saying, I'm faithful. I'm not only capable of making stars, I'm capable of making that many offspring for you. And so we just continue through this narrative with the way God's interacting. So God is reassuring him. He's not saying, oh, you man of little faith, or what are you doing? Like, I know you don't have a child yet. It's not a big deal to me, right? Like, he's not telling him the plan. Oh, you're going to be, you just got to wait another 15 years. God doesn't give him a timeline. I think this is really the test of time we're seeing here. Are you going to trust, right? God's kind of putting it before you. Are you going to trust me? I'm going to tell you again. I'm reaffirming without giving you the details that a human probably would want of when, but I'm just going to reaffirm to you, you're going to have a child. And so we just see that is really how he's reaffirming, and they're going to be talking about this particular promise. Okay. And then in verse 6, this is how Abraham responds. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Now, this is a big statement, right? So Abraham believed the Lord. That means he put faith into this whole thing. He said, okay, the land, got it, understood. Like, I don't own it, but we're here. Now I'm working on this child thing. We're working through it. And God says it's going to happen. Really, you're going to have a child. You're going to have lots of heirs. And so Abraham says, okay, I believe it. And God accounted to him righteousness. And so this word accounted means God noticed, saw, or maybe regarded him as a man of righteousness because of his faith. And so we'll see Paul pick this same thing up in the New Testament about Abraham being a man of faith, and that's where righteousness comes from. How we come into righteousness as well through Jesus, but in faith in Jesus, right? And so the righteousness is coming because we believe God, the righteous one. And so we're seeing this. Abraham asks a series of questions here, but those questions weren't a lack of faith. They were a clarifying set. And maybe there was some unbelief, but it's getting worked out. It's not getting deeper. Like, Abraham is not walking away scoffing. Oh, he says, I'm going to have a kid, and I can't see that happening. No, he goes, okay, I got it. I'm having a kid. Details still to be discussed, but he did believe God. And God's like, okay, that's what righteousness looks like. It looks like believing me, that I'm the God, the creator, right, of all the stars in the heavens, and I can do this in your life. And so this is the weighing statement of Abraham. He has seen, he's weighed out for his faith and righteousness. We talked about this a little earlier. Noah was blameless and righteous among his generations, meaning in comparison to people. No one can be completely righteous completely on their own. It doesn't mean that Abraham got everything right. We've already seen he hasn't. But his faith in God and what God's going to do is going to show us why this is being accounted as righteousness. And we'll see throughout his whole life, Abraham continues to grow in this faith. And so again, as this weighing out of his faith comes, the covenant comes. So it's always already that he's proven himself. It's the same thing. The covenant with Noah comes after the flood, after Noah's proven himself to be obedient. Here again, we have this already walk of faith, and then they receive the actual covenant. Now, I would say Abraham already had promises of pretty much what these covenants are going to confirm. But it's really important because these covenants make things, it's like almost having legal documents with them, right? Like for in covenant and spiritual language. So we're going to walk into that. Again, we're going to see Abram also in Hebrews in the 11:19. Abram will use the same words, account or reckon to God, that God is faithful. And so we see this reciprocity. Both parties, both Abram and God, see each other as faithful. And so again, Abram considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead. That's when he's going to put Isaac to death, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And so Abram knows God's a faithful God. By the time he gets to the point where he has to sacrifice Isaac and give him up, he's able to do that because he knows God's faithful. So all of these things are leading to that. But we just see that God is seeing and reckoning Abram as righteous, and Abram is reckoning God as faithful. And so between the two of them, they have this back and forth on what it looks like to see and weigh each other. And they're weighing each other. God always weighs us correctly. But Abram is also weighing God correctly, which is how he's able to walk through all of this. So if you don't believe God's faithful, not just powerful, but faithful, then it's hard to stick with something. I know in our day and age, the other half of this is we have to test a word or a promise and make sure it's not just us wanting something and those kinds of things. We need to make sure it's actually a word from God or a calling or whatever it might be to be able to walk it out. But we also need to know that God's faithful, that he's not going to lie to us, those types of things. So again, this is an important way of how we converse with God as well. Okay. In verse 7, it says, "Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit." So this statement, I am the Lord, is a covenant starting statement. We'll see this over and over through the Torah. When God is making covenant, he normally starts with, I am the Lord. And it's a way to know that the covenant starts here, in quotes, and the next few sentences are going to be part of this promise and covenant. And he says, I brought you up out of the Ur of Chaldeans. So he's specifically talking about that city about 140 miles from Babylon, out to the east in Babylon, where Terah had had the family living, probably was worshiping the moon gods and those kinds of things out there in Babylon. They were in the east. And God had called Abraham from the beginning, not from when they left there to the next city, but really from early on. He was calling Abram to the promised land all the way from Babylon. And he's saying, I'm going to give you this land. And this land, as we know, will be defined kind of as Eden, the Garden of Eden, same kind of boundary lines and that idea from the river marks that we'll get later on. But it is supposed to be the promised land. And so God is moving him to the right place. So that's how this covenant starts. I'm the one who called you out of that Babylon type life to this new life of promise. And that's how this covenant with Abraham starts. And we're going to see there's a number of covenants in the Bible. First, there's one specifically with Noah. There's another one with Abraham. There's going to be one at Sinai with Moses and the people to start their nation. And the giving of the law will all happen with that covenant. That will be a two-way covenant where they have to actually follow through and not do idolatry and follow God. And then we'll have a new covenant in Jesus. There's some other probably minor. Oh, there's a Davidic covenant that there will always be a king on the throne of David eternally. Jesus would come from his line. So we'll see that covenant as well. So there's a number of covenants in the Bible that God makes with people. And this one in particular is with Abraham, right? And so again, we're going to see the same kind of thing. And we just compare for a moment what happens in some of these covenants. So like the accompaniment here is going to be a sign of darkness, fire, and smoke, kind of like on Mount Sinai when Moses gets that covenant. So some of these covenants have this very heavy feel, this darkness, fire, and smoke, kind of the power, the awesomeness, and holiness of God. This covenant's going to lead up to the Mosaic one. This covenant's going to even mention the 400 years of bondage and subsequent freedom, which will lead right into the Mosaic covenant era. So again, we have this Abraham being promised this, and then later Moses will receive the next set of promises for the nation. So we have these different pieces of covenant that God continues to roll out through history. And it's important because now we live in the new covenant, right, which supersedes all other covenants, which is ratified in the blood of Jesus. Jesus was the mediator. Jesus is the finisher. You can read about that covenant pretty thoroughly in the book of Hebrews about Jesus's role in establishing us. And that really is our salvation and the fullness and the finish of the covenant ideas, because we come into that final covenant with Jesus. And so these older covenants are still really important because they're what's going to lead up to Jesus coming, right? He comes as a baby into the land and through the line of Abram. So this is a highly important starting point for some of these covenants. Okay, so let's go back to the covenant promise. So in verse 8 it says, "And he said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it?" And so Abram's asking another question. It's a clarifying question. And so God said to him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." And he brought all these to him and cut them in two down the middle and placed each piece opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. So this seems odd to us. Abram says, well, usually with a covenant, at least in that time period, there would be an act of the covenant. Even in our time period, we have this, right? We get married, we go down to City Hall or have a big wedding, and we have a oath-taking ritual and ceremony, and exchange rings, and we say vows, and then somebody signs a piece of paperwork, and at least that's how we do it in our country. And I'm sure every other country has different pieces to that. But Abram's like, well, if we're doing a covenant here, you just said, I'm the Lord your God. Okay, covenant statement. And so how is this going to be a covenant? Like in that time period, usually there were different things. One of the things they could do was cut animals in half. And then the two parties would walk between the two halves. They'd lay them out. And then they walk between them and say, I'm making a covenant with you right now, basically taking an oath. And if I don't follow through on my part of the contract, let to me happen what happened to this animal, meaning I'll get cut in half. And so, that's a pretty strict business agreement, right? Maybe it's some sort of contract or something. I'm thankful that this day and age, when we go to buy a house or sign a contract for something, we just sign it with a pen and ink, and we don't have to do the big oath swearing process and bring a young heifer or goat. But again, in this time period, this probably would have been very normal. You might make a covenant with a person. That way, like I said earlier, he had some friends. It's possible he had some sort of contract or covenant with them that he'd made, right? They were sworn to be each other's allies and help each other out in times of war. And so, or not raid each other, whatever it might be. But basically, Abram's like, well, usually with covenant, we do something. And God says, okay, let's do something. Let's do it physically. And so we're having God speak, right? He said in a vision, and now we're moving this to the physical. And so go get me these things. He's doing this. And you get kind of the sense almost like Elijah does this, right? He does some stuff to the altar. He puts an animal on it. He pours water over it and then waits for God. And you kind of get that sense here with what Abram's doing, because the birds of the vultures come to eat these carcasses. So it gives this idea that there's a little bit of time. Moses does this thing and says, okay, God, what are we doing? Is Abram supposed to walk through these and make the oath? It doesn't seem like it, because it's kind of one way. And then again, we just have this idea that this covenant's having some opposition, right? The vultures are coming to even destroy what's being left out. And so again, we're having possibly a little bit of time pass. He's waiting. He's having to have some faith that he's had this vision, and then that God's going to do this very physical act. And again, sometimes it's one thing to have a vision and maybe think you heard God. It's another to expect God to come and move physically, right? We see that happen. We see God do those things in our physical bodies or healings or whatever it might be. There's things that God does and moves. We'll see this happen sort of in the same vein of a physical thing with the fleeces later in the Old Testament. And so the fleece gets put out. But again, that's just with water. This is kind of going to become something more supernatural, an interaction with the physical world. So at verse 12, it says, now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Okay, so it's hot, probably the sun's up, but as it starts to get dark, you kind of expect God to show up in the daylight, but no, he's going to come when it's dark, right? Like I said, some of these covenants are done with kind of a darkness or smoke or fire with it. And this deep sleep falls on him. So Abraham's not part of this covenant making. He's not the one walking between the animals. He's not the one making this happen. And behold, horror and great darkness fell on him. So he's asleep, and it sounds like it would probably feel like a nightmare. We see the same thing happen in the book of Daniel. Daniel has a horrible dream, and it's from God. And so Abram is in the midst of having what we would consider a really dark or difficult experience, but it's of God, right? God's great holiness and presence and things are here. Um, and and then we see in verse 13, and God said to him, right? He said to him, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nations whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards they will come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Okay, so part of the reason this probably is a horror and great darkness of this dream is because of the message in it. That he's going to have no certainty your descendants are going to go be strangers in a foreign land. They're going to go to Egypt. We're going to find that out. They're going to be servants and slaves there. They're going to be, it's going to be a bad thing. Egypt is going to enslave them while they're there. And God's saying this is part of the plan. 400 years they're going to be there. And it's a nation that they're going to serve, and then God's going to judge that nation, right? Egypt's not going to get off. They're going to have the plagues come. They're going to have a horrible judgment come. But your family line is then going to come out with just massive possessions. They're going to be much larger, much stronger, right? I said over 1 million people. It says that the Egyptians basically hand over things to them as they're leaving. And so again, Abram is promised that this isn't going to happen in his lifetime. He's going to have a peaceful life, but this is going to happen in his descendants' line. And sometimes I think with these heavy messages from God, they might not feel very good. We see this with Daniel as well. He's getting those prophecies about those beasts and the nations to rise and all the darkness that's going to come on the earth and the judgments of God. And so this is kind of the same thing Abram's getting here, a heavy message. And so we see that some of the wording that God uses, that this is going to take 400 years and fourth generations till they return here. Because the Amorites are still in the land, and really they're not ready to be punished yet. They still haven't gone completely bad, or they still need more time, God's grace for them. And so it's not time to possess this land for another 400 or 500 years. So now Abraham's getting a timeline on the land promise, but he hasn't gotten a timeline yet on the seed promise. That's still something he's going to have to work through. So again, the land promise is being clarified even further here. This idea now we see that as the voice comes, right? And Abram's sleeping. And so it's dark, and this encounter with God is happening. Again, this is just, I think, one of those very unusual but very awesome chapters about what God does to make covenant. And like I said, it's one way. Abram's sleeping through this whole thing. There's nothing he has to do at this point other than remain faithful to believing the promises. And then in verse 17 it says, and it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. So I don't know how Abram, asleep, can know that a burning torch has passed between a smoking oven and a burning torch. So you get this idea of smoke and fire again, right? We're going to see that at Mount Sinai and other places. But here, something very physical or supernatural, this smoking oven, burning torch, so fire and smoke, and we'll see a pillar of fire explained a lot of times in Exodus, goes between these pieces of animal. It's God's presence himself going between them, saying, I'm the one making this covenant. And so as this is happening, we have to assume maybe Abram woke up, or something that he knows that this happens, that he saw this. Maybe he's seeing it in the dream. I don't know. But again, it gets the sense that maybe he's seeing this so he can relate this to others, that he knows for sure that this happened. And so again, God's the one that initiated it. God said, go get these animals. I'm going to pass through them and lay them out and do, the normal covenant thing. And so again, we have this idea that God is coming in presence. And this is considered a theophany, right? That God does something, shows himself real in some sort of tangible, physically visible way. Again, it doesn't say that Abram touched this fire or anything, or interacted with this smoking pot, nothing like that. But you do get this idea that this was very real, very physical thing that was happening, as it is with the animals and those kinds of things being separated here. And so again, we have this spiritual world now intersecting the physical world. And this is confirmation, right? This covenant now is really official. There's been a promise. There's been animals. There's been all of the oaths taken, everything needed. And so again, On the same day that the Lord made the covenant with Abraham, saying to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river of the river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Kenzites, and the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Gershonites, and the Jebusites. So basically, God says, look, this is the covenant to your descendants. You get this land. Landmarks are the river of Egypt, to the great river, the river Euphrates. So that's a huge area, right? Egypt, Euphrates is over in modern day, like Iraq. So I don't know exactly what the boundaries were back then and which rivers. But again, these river names are strikingly similar to the ones we've already seen, which were the ones for the promise, were for the Garden of Eden. So some of these same rivers are being used, names. So again, the promised land is giving, at least if nothing else, a similar feel to it as the Garden of Eden. Now again, pre-flood, post-flood, exactly where those are and exactly where the Garden of Eden is isn't exactly clear, but it is this idea that God is saying, I'm giving you the best land in the world. And Abram probably is thinking, we've had a war, we've had a famine, Lot can't even be around because I got too many sheep that can't sustain us. So those things, but God is like, no, this is where it's promised because it's spiritually where I want you. Okay. So at this point in time, Abram has been promised at the age of 75, a couple of chapters earlier, when he gets to the land, offspring. He's been promised, he's age 75, and then here he's getting older. And we'll see by the next chapter, he's 85. So 10 years is going to pass on this child promise. And then he's 99 when God comes and promises this again. And so from the time he enters to the time he has the child, it's going to be 25 years. And this is probably still pretty early on within the first 10 years. And so we're going to have to see how he works through this. Like I said, the land promise is being settled. There's a timeline on that. You're going to be here. You're going to die here. Then they're going to get carried off for about 400 years. And they're going to come back here. Or they're going to go be slaved and then come back here. So there's kind of a timeline now. But the timeline for the child has not yet been discussed. So we get into Genesis 16, and Sarai and Abram come up with a plan. And this is going to be to solve the child problem. God promised Abram this child. He's obviously told Sarai about it. We don't know how many times. We don't know how affected she is by her barrenness. We have to assume pretty affected. Back then, to have children was everything. It was a big part of a woman's life, especially she had maids and servants and things like that to do a lot of the other stuff for her. So really that would have been a big part of some expectation of her life. She's moved away from all of her family. And so they are now living in this land. And now Sarai, says Abram's wife, had borne him no children. And she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, see, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. After Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, so he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. So Hagar starts despising Sarai. And so we get the idea that there is some major family conflict going here. It's been 10 years when this comes up. So 10 years ago, Abram was promised a child. Sarah can't have that child. We don't know who's blaming who here, right? It could be, Abram, it's your fault. You can't have children. It's, or he could be saying, hey, it's your fault. Why can't you have this child? We don't know what's going on in their relationship. It comes to the point where Sarai just kind of, it sounds like, gives up and says, you know what? Just marry my maidservant as your second wife and have this child with her. And it happens. So now we know Abram's quite capable of having children. It's Sarai that can't. And as that comes to full knowledge, now Hagar, as with we'll see in other Old Testament stories, narratives, she starts to despise Sarai. She's like, look, I can get pregnant. What's wrong with you? You're obviously not the blessed wife. I am. I can do this for him and you can't. Right? We see this almost the same dialogue happening in the story of Hannah. It's where I'm kind of picking up some of that. Like there was an animosity, right? We see this in Leah and Rachel's story as well. Rachel says, give me children or I'll die to Jacob. And he's like, I can't make this happen. I'm having plenty with the other 3 wives, or wife and 2 concubines. I don't know what's going on with you. Again, and there's a lot of conflict there, a lot of looking down on the woman who doesn't have the children. So again, Sarai at this point not only is feeling the pressure that for the 10 years that she hasn't been able to fulfill this promise, she comes up with a solution that God's not in, right? She and Abram consents. He marries this woman. He has a child with her. It's been 10 years, and so they figure that this is taken care of. It's not of the Lord. We know because in Matthew it tells us that, in Matthew 16:22. And this is going to be considered a child born of the flesh in Galatians 4:22. It's them trying to make a promise happen that God has every intention of fulfilling in his timing, right? So the land promise is going to happen in 400 or 500 years, and the child promise has only been 10 years. So, they've got time. This way of having children through others is not commented on morally. We're going to see it in several other books and other narratives. And here it causes the same thing it usually does. Anytime there are multiple wives or competition to have children, especially Rachel and Leah, Hannah and the other wife, it always brings contention. So even though it's not morally being commented on anywhere in these passages, later on in Leviticus, it'll say don't marry 2 sisters, which is, we would take as pretty obvious. And other places, it's always frowned upon to go into a situation where there's polygamy in the Old Testament. Although it's not absolutely forbidden, does, like I said, have restrictions on it. There are particular boundaries put on it because it's not the best. And it causes family conflict in almost all cases. We'll see this in the life of David, even. His children, his sons are fighting over different placements in the kingdom because he has a lot of wives. And so, again, in this case, there's going to be Ishmael that's born. Leah and Rachel both have their maids have children this way. So, like I said, we're seeing this kind of thing happen. Those children, though, will be considered legitimate to Jacob and part of the 12 tribes. Here, however, Ishmael is not considered the child of blessing. He is absolutely considered in the New Testament as the child of the flesh, the idea of Abram and Sarah only. So it's not completely clear why those other children are part of the line of blessing in the 12 tribes. It is important to point out that Judah is of Jacob's first wife, though. That line of blessing does flow through that first wife again. Again, I'm not going to say that always is the case, as we'll see, I believe, with the life of David. But here, we just see that this becomes a very messy situation, right? Part of what also is being highlighted, it says it several times, that Hagar is from Egypt. So we don't know when she was brought into the collective family structure here. It could have been one of the travels that Abram had made to Egypt. It could have been something like that. Again, Egypt is sometimes good and sometimes bad. They're kind of a protector place that people flee to. But it is pointed out multiple times that she's Egyptian. She's not of the same line, right? She's not part of this family line that Sarah is. Sarah's his half-sister. They're of the same family line. And we'll see that in Isaac and Jacob's stories. They both go back to Terah's line, that family line, to marry women. So they kind of keep this family line going. And so this is being much pointed out that this is a foreign wife. Again, and so again, we'll see in verse 5 that Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. So Sarai says, this isn't fair. None of this is working out right. She's mad. She's mad at Abram. And he says, do what you want. She's your maid. And he doesn't say, oh, she's my wife, or, my favored wife, or anything like that. So Sarah deals harshly. We don't know what that means exactly, but it probably wasn't very just. Again, they're in a fight, and nobody in this situation is in the right. Hagar is in the wrong towards Sarai to start with. Sarai treats Hagar wrong. Hagar flees, which is wrong. She's leaving Abram in the blessing and the father of her child. And Abram has gone along with this whole fleshly plan, from having this child with Hagar to allowing Sarah to treat Hagar harshly. Again, he doesn't deal with Hagar directly or do any of that. So again, this is just a very large family mess because of what they've done here. Now in verse 7, so Hagar is out fleeing from this, and we see that this picks up again. Now the angel of the Lord found her, Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from? And where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Okay, this is quite the message, right? The angel of the Lord comes. This is, I think, the first time we're seeing the angel of the Lord. And we're going to find out that this is the physical form of God coming. So this would be considered a theophany. Before Jesus comes in the incarnation, we get this several times in the Old Testament, theophanies, where God comes in physical form. Hagar is openly fleeing to her country, Egypt. So she's on a road trip, pregnant, and God sends her back to Abram. This is the message. God intervenes. He says, no, this is Abram's son. It's not just yours. You can't run off to Egypt. She's carrying his child. She's carrying something important. Part of the blessing of Abram is now this child. It's not the blessed child, but it is part of Abram's offspring, and it is to be his to take care of. And so, again, God has had to intervene yet again. And then we see Hagar in this interaction. She says, then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude, so uncountable offspring. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. So the angel of the Lord is there talking to her face to face, right? She's having this encounter with God, and he's giving her some clear instructions. This child is still going to be blessed. It's still going to have a great multitude of descendants. And how important is this to someone who's a servant, being treated as a slave? She's being sold as a wife, beaten. It's just not quite a very good situation in any sense. You don't get the sense whether she had an option to become a wife here or any of this. So again, she's in a bad spot, and the angel of the Lord sending her back into this very dysfunctional situation where Abram's not really protecting her, and she's not behaving well, and they're in this fight. So again, she's being told that even as a servant, her son is going to have this great amount of people come from him, and we're finding something out. And how important is that? How many people do we know that, their parents had very little or gave everything they could for their kids to have a different life, right? We hear this all the time. Oh, yeah. And so Hagar now has something to do. She can live her life in such a way that she's going to know her son's going to make it. He's not just going to become another slave or servant in this household. She's probably thinking, oh, what's going to become of us? Like, are they just going to kill us there, or just beat us all the time? Like, are we just now their slaves? Again, she's basically being told, God's telling her, I'm seeing this affliction you're going through, and I have noticed it, and I've come to encounter you. The Lord is telling her all this. So the next thing God says is he will be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And so he's going to have a great multitude, but he's going to be a wild man. And so he's not going to be a servant, and he's going to have his own people, but it's not going to be the blessed line. It's going to be a little different. Just because he doesn't have to answer to somebody doesn't mean he's going to be very independent. He's going to be wild. A wild man also can be translated wild donkey of a man, which is really close to the same word Paran, which is the area which Ishmael's tribes are going to be located in. So again, there's a lot of word plays going on here that we can't quite see in the English. He's going to be wild like a donkey, right? And so Ishmael's life will contrast Isaac's pretty much at every point. Ishmael's going to have 12 princes. Isaac's line is going to have 12 tribes that are going to make a nation. But again, he's going to have 12 princes, but it's not going to be a blessed line. Ishmael's going to have a restless life, but no promised land. He's going to kind of dwell inland around there, but it's not going to be the same. And he's going to have a nonconformist kind of attitude that's not going to be said to bless the whole world. So again, there's going to be these like tensions between these two brothers and what's going on here. And then So again, God's still speaking. Like I said, this is a theophany. He's standing there speaking to her. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, also seen, have I also here seen him who sees me? And therefore, the well was called Bir Le Roy. Observed, it is between Kadesh and Bered. Okay, so here we see that she says this very important statement. God sees me and I've seen him. But in this statement, she actually says, I've seen the back of him, meaning I haven't seen God face to face, even though he's a person standing there. She says, I've seen the back of him, meaning it's still not the fullness of God, right? Because you get this sense in the Old Testament, and this is kind of important to Moses, right? He knows because God told him, you can't see me face to face. You can only see my back. I'm going to shelter you and I'm going to pass by you. You'll see my glory, but you'll only see the back of me. If you saw me face to face, you'd die. So Moses writing this narrative is being very clear. When the angel of the Lord comes, that's really seeing the back of God. That's not seeing him face to face. That's why she's allowed to live. And so again, it's kind of implied in this verse that she is seeing the back of him who sees me when it's translated fully. So again, this is probably a pre-incarnate of the second person. The Trinity is usually how it's described. It could have been, we're not exactly clear on that, but typically a theophany is before Jesus comes incarnate. Once he comes as a baby, he lives a fully human life. He has a physical body. He has a resurrection body now. Like that is a different thing, but this is before all that happens, right? And so she's seeing God in physical form. We'll see this again. We've seen in Genesis 18, Exodus 3, and Judges 6. We'll see the angel of the Lord come in physical form. And then this well that she's at this time is called Bir Le Roy, which means the well of the living one, my seer. She realizes God is living. It's maybe a new concept to her, but he came as a person in a person form of the angel of the Lord. So she's seeing that he's living. He's not just an idol. He's not something else. And he sees her. He's my seer. He's the one that heard me. He's the one that saw me. And she's going to name her child that every time she calls her child, right? And she's going to be, oh yeah, I remember where, I had this child. There's promises on his life. And so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Abram, again, this final verse in this chapter is pointing out that Abram is taking full responsibility of his son Ishmael. At this point, Abram probably believes Ishmael is the promised son, possibly. Like, we're not real clear. That hasn't been completely worked out yet. Abram was only told it was going to come from his own body. So far, this is all that's happened. Again, we don't have any retrospect yet. Abram takes this child into his home. And so far, we don't know that Sarah is the one that's going to have the child, right, at this point in their time. And so, again, he's 86. So we have this time frame. It's been 11 years. He has a child. And we can move on from there with the assumptions that start to happen. Okay. So when Abram is 99 years old, he's had 13 years pass since Ishmael was born. So as Genesis 17 starts out, we're going to look 13 years ahead. And so he had Ishmael, we have a 13-year gap, and then God's going to speak again. So isn't that kind of how life goes sometimes? We have this big thing happen, God promises something, and then we have this test of time. And we're not really sure what Abram and Sarah were thinking in this. Abram may have just been thinking, this is the son. He came from me. He didn't come from Sarai. She can't have kids. She's barren. Maybe they put this whole thing aside at this point. Again, we had Abram promise this when he was 75, and now we're going to really have to talk through this. This is when God is meeting Abram. So when Abram was 99 years old, so now he is old. It's been almost 25 years since the original promise for this child. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. Again, really strong opening statement. And I will make my covenant between me and you and will multiply you exceedingly. So again, covenant talk, right? God is saying, like, remember, you're to be blameless. I'm just Almighty. So, we've got these two sides of what's required for this covenant. And so the Lord appeared to Abram again. So what does it mean to appear here? When the Lord appeared to Abram, is this the angel of the Lord, physical form, or is this something else? We don't know. Again, it's not completely clear. It's left to the reader to kind of infer, but they're having a conversation in this one again. This is the Lord making another or reaffirming the covenant with Abram. The first one emphasized the land, and this one is going to really emphasize the abundance of descendants. Abram, right? The land has kind of gotten worked out. We've worked through some of the faith issues with staying in the land, but we really haven't worked through this child issue yet. Abram might have thought for the last 13 years it was solved with Ishmael, possibly, but again, it might not be, right? According to God. And so Abram is to walk before God and be blameless, which we find out Abram eventually does, right? Like as he lives his life, we'll find that out in the New Testament even. And in this place where God appears to Abraham, so we've had dreams and visions and God speaking, Abram falls on his face in this one. So then Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations." Okay? Seems like it could happen now. Falling face down is a sign of respect and submission. So Abram is doing what you should do before God, show him respect and submission. And God is again reaffirming this covenant blessing. You're going to have great descendants. Okay, so again, the next verse 5, no longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. Okay, so the name change is big, right? We're just going to add a couple letters, but these letters mean a lot. So quite a few of the names we've already talked about, the cities in Ur and Haran practiced moon worship. So the names like Terah and Laban and Sarai and Milcah point towards that moon god. And so when he's changing the name of Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah, it includes the name of the true God and dedication to him. So adding that HA to both of their names, or the AH to both of their names, is putting God's name, Jehovah, into their name, right? We're getting the sense that he's taking, and we've seen this already. We've seen the EL or the JOH in other people's names. We had Melchizedek, or these other people with the L in it, the EL, Michael, right? It ends in EL, Gabriel ends in EL. That means the name of God's in there, showing that they are under the ownership or directorate of God. And here, their names are going to be changed. So they're no longer going to be associated with any other God or themselves or anything else. They're going to now have their name changed to have God's name in it. So basically, this is part of the covenant is renaming them to be dedicated to God. This is pretty much dedicating themselves to God by changing their names. So again, they go with this. There's quite a few names, though, in the lines like Adam, Eve, Abel, Seth, and Enosh that are not theophoric, not God-centered names. And that was fine. But in this case, these two names really need to become God-centered to show their commitment to him as part of this covenant. So anytime you're naming something, right, you're taking authority over it. You're saying, I have the right to do this. We saw that early on. And so God is saying, I have the right to do this in your lives. Follow me. And it kind of gives that sense of sonship, all right, and daughtership to the two of them. They're kind of being more adopted by God and really taking on his name. We do this in marriage, right? Or to our children, we give them a last name that's all shared in the family. So that's pretty much what's going on here. In verse 6, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I'll make nations of you, and kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I give you and your descendants after you the land in which you are strangers, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay, so the covenant is additive, and we see this quite regular in Scripture. God unfolds who he is, his names, his character, and even covenants and promises. And so, again, as we walk things out, Abraham's getting more specificity. The land thing, 500 years. The child thing, we haven't really had that conversation fully yet. That's what we're in the midst of. He's going to be extremely fruitful. So we've heard that. But kings are going to come from him. So we're going to find out later that the line of Judah will be the kingly line that David comes from, and ultimately Jesus. Well, that's new. Abram's not a king, right? And again, and then we're seeing this is going to be an everlasting covenant. Well, that's a huge promise, because I don't know about how we think about this, but at some point there's a last generation of people on earth, right? But this is going to be everlasting, which can only happen through something bigger than humans, which is Jesus, right? And so this everlasting covenant is now being promised. And they're going to have the land as an everlasting possession. So there's also this idea of being Eden forever, and I'll be their God. So again, this isn't going to be a few people affected by Abraham's choices and his faith. This is going on forever. This is like at the scale of even bigger than Noah now, right? Noah's going to bless everybody in the world. Abram's already been told that. And now Abram's being told not even just the current world, but for all generations into forever. And so we have both the spatial aspect and the time aspect being promised here. And so just much like Noah, the whole population saved through his faith. Now Abraham, we'll be using that name now, will be affecting the whole world through his faith. And that's just an amazing thing, right? Okay, so then we're going to get into verse 9 through 14. I'm not going to read all of it because basically it's just there needs to be a sign for this covenant. And Abraham, last time I met with you and we talked about covenant, split the animals, God did everything. This time Abraham has something to do. They need to have a sign for this covenant. They need to have a reminder because this is going to go on a long time. And all the generations need to show themselves as part of this covenant. So they remember this covenant isn't just with Abraham today, right now, with that, the fire and the smoke going between the animals. No, this is going for all of them. So that God doesn't have to, keep doing that covenant over and over with each generation. He says, it's on you guys to remember the covenant with a sign, and that's circumcision. So that's very painful. It's to the males. They have to do this to all the males in their household, all the slaves, all the servants, all the male children. Anybody in the household now of Abraham has to do this. He's 99 years old. He also has a 13-year-old son. So they all have to go through this process. Again, you can read that bit there. For Noah, it was a rainbow in the sky. God did the covenant promise. Now, and Abraham is going to have to do this. And every generation after him is going to have to do this. We even see Moses having to deal with this in his own children and life. So again, this takes human involvement. It shows that they are accepting the covenant now. And so this now is becoming two ways, right? So it's everlasting, God's promising, but you guys also have to do your side. And then in verse 15, it says, Then God said to Abram, As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings and people shall be from her. Okay, this is brand new, right? Sarah's not been mentioned up to now. Up to now, it was Abraham, and they kind of got the idea that maybe we could trade out wives on this promise. It could come through Hagar. But this is so specific now. Sarai gets her name changed, and she's also going to be the mother of kings and princes, right? And it's going to be a son through her. Sarai's going to have a child. And this is quite crazy because Abram's old, but Sarah is really too old to have children at this point. Again, they were living a lot longer, having children a lot later, but she's in her near 90 at this point. This is still too old for even back then. I mean, this would be talking to somebody maybe in our day and age that's 50 or 60 and saying, I know you never had children, but you're going to have one now. And so up until this point, Abram probably believes Ishmael is the promised son because that hadn't really been corrected yet. And this is kind of the correction. Now it's clear that God's saying it's Sarah that's going to have this. She's going to be the mother of the nations. This is going to be the blessed line. Yes, there's Hagar came back. She had that amazing encounter with the angel of the Lord. And I said that son was going to have multitudes come from him. Well, guess what? That was not the same as the promise I gave you to have a child that was going to have a whole nation and multitudes come from it. That's going to be part of your descendants, but Isaac is going to be the blessed line in that other sense, and the royal line that's going to come from him, and it's going to come from Sarah's child. Okay, so Sarah means princess, and she's going to have this royal line come from her. So Abraham fell on his face and laughed. Well, he'd already fallen on his face. Now he's falling down laughing. Okay, we can see the humor in this, right? And he said in his heart, so we don't even know if he said this out loud, but God obviously knows our thoughts and our hearts. Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? He thinks this is hysterical. This is laughable, right? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abram said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. So, you get the sense that he's on his face laughing, like this is ridiculous. Like, you know what? We thought this was solved. Ishmael's here. Can we just stop talking about Sarai having a child? It's been 24 years at this point. And Abram, the man of faith, laughs and reminds God he already has Ishmael. And in 8:12, Sarah will also respond in laughter in the next chapter. So then God said no. So So Abraham's laughing and says, oh, that Ishmael might live and be the one. Hagar had that amazing encounter with the angel of the Lord. She came back and told us all, my son's awesome, and I've been raising him for 13 years as my own son. So I figured he was the one, and I needed to take care of this child. I thought the plan had worked, right? That's kind of the sense you get. Hagar had that experience. She comes back. He's going to have a great multitude. And here God's like, no, that was never the plan. It's always been Sarah that's supposed to have this child. And I think this is important. Sometimes we think of these patriarchal blessings and covenants as only being for the men, but really there's quite a number of the women that are involved in these. Sarah has a promise on her life just as much as Abraham does. So then God says, no, your wife shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant and with his descendants after him. So God is correcting Abraham's laughter and unbelief. It's hard to imagine that Sarah's going to repeat this same error after this correction's already been given to Abraham, but she will laugh also. God is so faithful that he builds Abraham's faith by explaining that Ishmael is not the one. And so God is correcting him, and he knows, and quite honestly, Abraham does respond well usually. Right? That's why this keeps happening. That's why God's willing to keep working with him. That's why he's not moving off to the east of Babylon. He's able to stay engaged in this process. And then God says, and as for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly, right? He's not going to be a servant. So he shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. Then he finished talking with him, and God went away from Abraham. So the timeline of Isaac's birth is set. Abram has some business to do first, right? He has to go get circumcised. And then he's to have Isaac within that next year time frame. This is the first we've had a time frame on the seed. This is the first we've had a time frame on this part of the promise and how this is all going to work out, that it's going to come through Sarah, right? We know how the land is and the timeline on that, but now we finally have timeline. That timeline's given, this is like a 3-month timeline to get pregnant. This is short. This isn't a long drawn out thing because within a year they're going to have this child. And so you don't have a lot of time to get pregnant then. So they've only got 3 months now. This is kind of last minute thing, instructions now. So Abram took Ishmael, his son. Oh, and by the way, Ishmael's not going to get forgotten. He's not going to be slave status to Isaac. This isn't like that. He's going to have his own thing. He's going to, like we found out, he's going to be kind of independent and self-willed. So Abraham took Ishmael, his son, all were in his house and brought them, and he circumcises them, right? So I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but you can read that in these last few verses of the chapter 17. And this time, the covenant is not done by God with the dead animals. It's going to be done by Abram through the obedience of circumcision. And so he does it. He follows through. He's really old. Ishmael is 13, and all of his, right? He had 318 standing army at one point, so all of them. So he has to go back and convince everybody, this is a real covenant. And by the way, you're all doing this. This is a very painful act of circumcision. This is a very difficult thing, but they're serious. And not only have we changed our names, but we're following God full out. We're doing exactly what he says here. And so Abram, as a leader of the household, is laying down that foundation here. So this is really where we're going to end this one. But the great obedience is being shown. And again, I just love that they had this interaction, that even when Abraham is laughing in disbelief, God is reaffirming something. And it seems like this is new, right? This is a new piece to this, that as he walks these things out, God keeps unfolding more and more. Sarah's going to be the mother. You're going to have this other child. There's going to be 2 children, all of these things, and that Abraham needs to know to now live this out. And again, God could have said this 25 years earlier to him. You're going to have 2 sons, one, or you should only have one, or been a little bit more clear, it's going to take 25 years. But no, that's really what this test of faith. How could Abraham and Sarah show their faith except by living it out a long time? Okay, so that's where we'll end.